Believe class has finally begun. Sorry, it's been a long time since we've done one of these. I mean, I can make all the excuses I want, but, we'll just consider it a little summer vacation. How about that? There was a little summer vacation between, last writing advice stream and this one, and now we're back. But anyway, what's up, peeps? Archie here. And yes, today we are doing writing advice, as you can see by my glasses. Yes, we are on to the next lesson, satire. The reason that I wanted to comment on satire is back when I was in college, there was a former English teacher turned comedian. He was actually pretty funny, not too bad. After his set was done, he kind of hung around with the student activities committee. And afterwards, he was just sort of chilling. I think he didn't have dinner, so he was just eating pizza, and he shared some pizza with the students who stuck around. And I was one of them, just because I wanted to see what he was doing and stuff. But while he was there, he actually talked about satire a little bit. And he argued to the rest of us. He kind of lectured us a little bit on how he does not see the value in satire if people are not capable of picking up on it. Which, I mean, makes sense in a way. Why waste your breath if the people that you're trying to, argue with, won't listen? Or can't understand the argument that you're trying to make? Which is why I think it's important to educate people on exactly what satire is and how to recognize it. Because it all boils down to people's literacy, people's reading comprehension, which, not to brag, but I scored really, really well on my ACTs, so bam. It was actually my highest score on the ACTs. I got a perfect score on reading comprehension. I think my next closest was English. My lowest was math, but that wasn't because I was bad at math. It was because I didn't take a math course for that year. And I keep beating myself up for it because I could have done a lot better on the math if I actually knew some of the stuff they were talking about. But I didn't learn that until the next year because I didn't take the required math course. I was lazy and I replaced it with just a study hall instead so that I could get my homework done at school so that I could just play video games at home. I had my priorities, but they weren't necessarily good ones. But like I said before, we're not worried about numbers today. Instead, we are worried about, oh god, it's the void. It's the void. There we go. We're worried about satire. We're going to be going over what it is, what it does, how to recognize it, all those fun little details. So, let us jump right in. So the first thing to know about satire is, according to the OED, a satire is a work of art which uses humor, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticize prevailing immorality or foolishness, especially as a form of social or political commentary. Basically pokes fun at things and kind of shows how ridiculous they are. It comes from the Latin word satura, which means poetic medley, which I didn't know. Originally, satire was specifically used in a poetic format. It was done with prose, it was done with, rhymes, things like that. But as you could probably tell, it branched out a lot since its early day uses. Now, it's typically divided into three different types. Three different categories of satire, you could say. They're all named after different Greek poets. The first one is Horatian, named after Horace, and that's more of a lighthearted, funny take on satire. Leaning much more into the making fun of things, using the humor to get its point across, stuff like that. The next is Juvenalian, which is Juvenalis, I believe. Juvenalian satire is more serious and more critical of its subject matter. Last but not least, we've got Menippean, named after Menippus. Menippean satire is much more focused on the original definition, the original framework of satire, so focusing much more on the poetic side of things, and actually focuses its subject matter on like different attitudes or behaviors rather than an overall like social or cultural theme. So what does satire do? Well, we can see an example of it right here. This is an older political satire comic. You see that there's this giant tentacle, like octopus beast with an oil rig, or like an oil container on its head that says Standard Oil. And it's got its tentacles reaching out to all these different people, some politicians. It's got the Senate, it's got the executive, and next it's going after the House. So this is a political satire cartoon talking about how oil is controlling everything. We can see that satire offers a critique in a clever / subdued way. This is more metaphorical, as we can see. There is no literal oil monster, I hope. I sincerely hope that this thing does not exist in real life. But yes, it makes it more thought-provoking rather than like a blatant analysis. Because you can say, oh, oil's controlling everything, and people can just take that as like a general statement and not really think much of it. But you put it in a striking visualization like this, and people are more prone to go, oh, that's actually pretty serious business. Because I don't want a giant tentacle monster coiling around all these different really important facets of our like society. I don't want it controlling me that way. And so you can get reform from that. Basically, reconceptualize something through satire, and it makes it easier to understand what makes that subject matter so ridiculous or so like out there. So first, we're gonna look at satire as commentary, because like I said, there are different ways to go about using satire. We are gonna look at the more serious, the juvenalian side. Successful satirical works like to point out the flaws in societies or politics of their time. And more often than not, they offer solutions on how to fix them, at least from the perspective of the writer. You gotta realize that satire, for as thought-provoking as it is, it still comes with a very heavy bias. It is not like journalism, which is supposed to be non-biased, very objective in its point-making. Satire is more often than not very heavily biased. Whether that be good or bad. Make sure to keep an open mind about it, but still shape your own thoughts about the subject matter. Here we have a few different examples. Very famous one is Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Technically also classified George Orwell, 1984, as political satire, going about it in a different route. Aldous Huxley and Orwell are typically seen as kind of like foils in their way of describing a dystopian society. Whereas Orwell is a lot more focused on like, oh, you've got the government watching your every move and you gotta be careful on how you act and stuff. In Brave New World, it's more so like, nah, we just let them have fun and they don't care about anything else. Like, as long as you make sure that everyone's happy with their lot in life, like there's still some control. There's still a lot of control from higher up positions of power. But for the most part, people are kind of just like doped up on Soma all day, and they have a lot of frivolities to them, to their like culture and stuff like that. And everyone else that's like in a position of power, they're just free to do what they want, basically. Jonathan Swift and his book Gulliver's Travels has a lot of different societies and cultures in it that are kind of poked fun and are replacements for different cultures in Europe at the time of his writing. And for those of you who did not know, The Wizard of Oz is actually considered in some circles as political satire as well, which when you think about it, actually makes a lot of sense. It goes over a lot of the shortcomings of American culture at the time. Looking at the different characters, you've got like a scarecrow who's out in the fields all day but doesn't have a brain, and that's represented or representative of farmers. How farmers work out in their fields all day but don't really have a good education system, which can still technically be said today. We have the Tin Man who doesn't have a heart, metalworking industry, logging specifically in this one. like very industrialized, but does not have the means with which to care for other people or the environment or things like that. Does not have a heart. And then the Cowardly Lion, who lacks courage. Lion is supposed to be the king of the forest, like the leader of the free world, but doesn't really have a lot of, strength, like moral strength, to back up their ideas for society. And then you've got, I don't know if anyone else knew this, but in the original book, Dorothy did not have ruby slippers. She had silver slippers. They returned to ruby because of the movie technology at the time. Like, they wanted to show off just how bright and vibrant all these colors were. So they changed her slippers to be a very, very bright red. But originally they were silver, and they were walking on a yellow brick road. So yellow, like gold, and silver, those are supposed to be like the gold and silver standards that were differing views on the economy at the time. And what, pray tell, do you measure the weight of gold and silver in? That's right, you weigh it in ounces. And what's the abbreviation of ounces? Bam. Oz. O-Z. I learned that in high school history class, and it absolutely blew my mind. I had no idea that there was all this intricacy. Like, I just knew Wizard of Oz as the movie. For the longest time, I just knew it as like, oh, okay, they made up this plot. I didn't know it was based off a book, and I didn't know the book. And this is like a children's book, too. I think it gets a lot more obvious as political commentary with later editions, because there are more books in the Wizard of Oz series. They have differing characters. There's like a Chinese doll who's like really fractured and stuff. Obviously, that goes into like foreign politics, but a lot of times, and actually this kind of goes into the next point, satire isn't always straightforward. So a lot of times those subtle tones can just fly over people's heads and they might not understand it. It can be too sarcastic or too metaphorical, and people just lack the ability to pick up on it. Sometimes they end up taking it a bit too seriously too. They'll be like, oh, that's the writer's actual opinions? Well, they're garbage. But then, like, it's the point. That's the point. The opinions are supposed to be garbage. Another example, actually, is Fight Club. Fight Club is another form of satire. It satirizes the hyper-masculine culture, you know? I mean, the whole plot, the whole premise, I haven't seen it myself, admittedly, but the whole premise is that there's an underground club where a lot of men get together and just beat the crap out of one another. And they can't tell anyone else about it. They can't do anything outside of Fight Club. They're just supposed to go about their day-to-day lives and just like hide this part of themselves. And that is incredibly hyper-masculine, and it's very damaging to just like men in general. And it often affects people outside of that sphere. But when the movie first came out, people didn't really catch on to that at the time, and there were actually a lot of fight clubs, weirdly enough, ironically enough, that sprung up across the country, across the United States. So again, flew over people's heads. They didn't understand that it was supposed to be satire, that this was like not a good thing to model themselves after, and there you go. Now you've got people wailing on each other in the middle of the night and not doing anything about it. Furthermore, on the commentary side of satire, we've got more Jonathan Swift. There is an old satirical essay, basically, called A Modest Proposal. It's very, very infamous, and it comments on the state of Ireland's poor under British rule in the 1700s. He wrote this in like sometime in the early 1700s, before 1750. Basically, Ireland was going through a really, really tough time, and a lot of the elites and the people who were loyal to Britain at the time, they didn't have to suffer the same way that a lot of the lower class citizens did, basically profited off of the suffering. And so Jonathan Swift comes out and he's like, hey, I see all these people suffering. How about, can you hear me out here? How about, in order to ease our suffering, maybe get us some more food on the table and stuff, how about we just cook our children? How about that? And, you know, that shock value got to a lot of people. They're like, oh my God, you can't be seriously suggesting that. But then he like ties it into a sort of like analogy. He's like, well, Britain is basically eating us alive right now. What's the difference? And that's the point where it's like, oh, I see what you mean. So very thought-provoking, and it kind of like leads you into the direction. Like that's another good thing about satire, is like when it's done right, it kind of leads the audience into the direction of like finding out the core thesis of whatever statement's being made. Another famous satire writer is Franz Kafka. Kafka's works are German, but they have been translated into many other languages. He's most known for Metamorphosis, where there's this guy named Gregor Samsa. He wakes up one morning and he has turned into a giant bug, and he can't go to work, and he's really sad about that. And basically that's a grim, surrealist kind of take on the German work culture at the time. Basically, whatever life you had outside of work, it didn't matter. All of your life belonged to your work. And Kafka was like, heck no. I don't like that. Nobody else should like that. And so he wrote a bunch of stuff on it. Like, it's very passive aggressive sometimes, the way he shows just how far gone people are in their work ideologies, I guess. I'm with Kafka on that one. Yeah, I mean, we can kind of see the same things in modern day US and Japan. Like the work cultures in our countries as well are a little bit ridiculous. A lot of overtime, a lot of expected to come in when you're called off, or when you're supposed to have a day off and then you get called in and you don't necessarily get paid extra for it and stuff like that. And next we've got Mark Twain. Mark Twain is a personal favorite writer of mine, specifically because, for those of you who do not know, Mark Twain is a cat guy. He had a quote, I can't remember if I'm paraphrasing this or not. I'm trying to remember it to the best of my ability. But basically, he had a quote where it's like, if there is a man who has a fondness for cats, he needs no further introduction for me to consider him my very dear friend. Basically like, hey, if you're a dude and you also like cats, you're in my good books. I would so love to bring Mark Twain into the modern age and just like see him go ham at all the like cat stuff online. And like, it'd be so cute to just see him like fawn over all these cat videos. He would be that old guy, right? He would be that boomer who just like looks at cat videos and shares cat videos all day. And it's like, look at this cat. He is, as they say, a chonker. It's like, thanks, Mark Twain. He is a chonker indeed. I may be idealizing it a little bit too much, but at the same time, just the whole prospect of it gets to me. But Mark Twain is also known for satirical works, including multiple essays that utilize subtlety and sarcasm to get his point across. Notable examples are The Awful German Language, speaking more on German, where basically he talks about all the absurdities that come with the German vocabulary and grammar and stuff. He talks at one point about how different nouns have genders, but at the same time it's like, well, okay, fish in German is fish, and in order to say the fish, it's der Fisch. Now, German articles go off of masculine, feminine, and neutral, so der, die, and das. If it's masculine, if it's a masculine word, it goes der. But what if it's a girl fish? Are you saying that this girl fish now has to have a like male article? So he goes into like the tragedy of the male fishwife and stuff, and just a bunch of different things like that. He also has different ones on like advice to youth and a presidential candidate, which you should definitely check out. Both of those basically give advice on like what makes a good young person or what makes a good presidential candidate, and it is so sarcastic. Like, I'm pretty sure one of the advices to youth he gives is like, always remember to obey your parents when they're around. It's like, okay. Now, we're moving on from satire as commentary to satire as comedy. A very famous political satire, like comedic political satire that you might know of, is South Park. So rather than give constructive representations on social issues, comedic satire typically uses said concepts as a punchline. It's not so much like, oh man, there are these things that are wrong with society and we should definitely like focus on changing them. It's more so like, God, doesn't society just suck? Like that's basically what it goes to. Some lessons can still be learned, of course. Like with anything sarcastic, there's always a grain of truth in it. But humor is still the main focus. We're going to move on to some other forms of comedy because these are actually pretty closely related, all things considered. So I believe it would do us well to kind of look at them piece by piece and see what differentiates them from each other, to see where the overlap is with satire as a whole and like where it gets separated. You know, it's like any other piece of vocabulary. You can have two words that essentially mean the same thing, like hot and scalding, but they have different contexts that make them more applicable in one sense or another. Like scalding is much more applicable if you're talking about something that deals with hot water. If you say hot, well, anything can be hot. You can have hot food, hot weather, but scalding is specifically when it comes to hot water and the way it feels on your skin, which, spoiler alert, is not good. So the different forms of comedy, the different forms of satire, going from a serious to a more comedic approach, in my personal opinion, goes this way. So we start with satire, just as a general overarching term. Then we go on to parody, then spoof, burlesque, and then finishing things off with farce. So let's go on to parody. So as you can see by the examples above, parodies exaggerate certain aspects of a piece of work, whether it be the characters, the tropes, so on and so forth. Whereas satire is a bit more subtle in the way that it approaches, you know, it uses irony, it uses sarcasm, it uses subtle metaphors to represent the things that it's, you know, poking fun at. Parodies are more focused on exaggeration, kind of just like making it as ridiculous as it can. Spoof. Spoof is the next one on the list. Spoof films are very, very popular and very, very funny. It goes further in exaggeration than parody does and focuses almost solely on humor. We have examples here, The Naked Gun. For anyone who's seen that, it's like a cop film, but the person who is the cop in question is completely inept, but it still works out somehow. We also have Robin Hood Men in Tights, which is like a retelling of the Robin Hood story, but just hammed up to ridiculous degree. Like you can see Robin Hood has like 5-6 different arrows notched in his bow right now, and he just like shoots that. Other notable examples of specifically spoof films that I would very, very highly recommend, anything by Monty Python, the movie Airplane, and Austin Powers, which is supposed to be a play off of spy films. So, next, we've got burlesque. A lot of people, especially in the US, largely associate burlesque with like vaudeville style shows. It's got some like musical comedy to it, maybe a little bit of a strip, sort of like risque sort of vibe to it. But generally speaking, burlesque is applied to any literary work that takes serious works and characterizes them. Basically like turns it into a mockery. Burlesque outright mocks or lampoons other genres or authors or subjects, though not necessarily in a malicious way. It's not supposed to be like, oh, this person's so stupid. It's more so just like, man, wouldn't it be so funny if instead of like all this crying that we do in Les Miserables, wouldn't it just be really funny if they got into like a dance battle instead? Some examples of burlesque can include Geoffrey Chaucer. If anyone knows the Canterbury Tales, there are a couple things that Geoffrey Chaucer writes, specific tales that are supposed to be all about like nobility and chivalry, but they just end up not. They turn into burlesques of the specific like chivalry genre. Some Shakespeare can also technically be considered burlesque. A specific piece, probably Much Ado About Nothing, It's supposed to be like a romance, but oh no, there's a villain trying to break up their romance. But all of it is just so stupid. I do not like I do not like Much Ado About Nothing. The whole plot, I mean, it says it in the title. Like, the whole plot is a nothing plot. It's a wedding that tries to get sabotaged, and just everyone's so stupid about it. The villain is stupid, the main character is stupid, the love interest is stupid. They all fall for the dumbest sort of like traps. Anyway, and finally, we go into Farce. I apologize for the image, but I swear it makes sense. Just stick with me here. The humor in Farce is almost always derived from crude or sexual themes, as you can see from this image, which is taken from the cover art of the movie Farce of the Penguins. Farce is often seen as very lowbrow as a result. As you can imagine, not everyone is all about crude humor. It doesn't always like land the way that you might want it to, and so people are just expected to go ha ha for the shock value. And there's like little to no thought being provoked here. Like, it's not supposed to be a commentary at all. It's just like, ha ha hee hee, we make poop joke, and oh ho, there are peepees and boobies and stuff. But technically there aren't any boobies, they're penguins. Please laugh. So what is the biggest lesson to learn here from all of this? Well, the biggest lesson is that satire can be seen as an umbrella term for anything that exaggerates or humorizes social, political, cultural, or topical issues. But it's also important to note that certain forms of satire take a more serious and argumentative approach. Satire can showcase one's wit in writing and give the writer a way to express their opinions on social matters in a thought-provoking way. Differentiating between the three main types of satire can help better understand how to engage with or respond to whichever one's on display. So, like I said before, if you're looking at Horatian satire, the more lighthearted and funny kind, you don't necessarily have to read too much into it. You could always just kind of like, haha, laugh at it and then move on with your day. But still kind of like keep it in your mind that like, oh yeah, the things that they were saying, they are kind of ridiculous in a way. But overall, just make sure that if you're looking at satire, just make sure you know how to recognize it and know when sarcasm is being used. I know it's really tough, especially in like written form, but just make sure that you try and pick up to the best of your ability on the sarcasm at play. And of course, here are the sources that I used. So yeah, that is all about satire. And this is awesome. I'm glad you think so. I am always happy to talk about writing advice, and satire is actually really, really important. I would say.